Hey guys, welcome back to Million Dollar Marketing. Today we are diving into the art of standing out, building engaged communities, and turning online spaces into real movements with my friend here, Goose. So if you've been in the school ecosystem at all, you've probably seen his work. He's been running the School World Tour. He's been hosting school game events with Alex Hormozy and helping creators and entrepreneurs scale their communities. But here's what I love about Goose. He doesn't just talk about marketing and engagement, he lives it. So today we are going to unpack how to build a standout brand, create a thriving community, and leverage digital marketing, even Facebook ads, to scale it. Are you ready, Goose?
I'm ready to.
Woo! Okay. All right.
Wow,
So
what an
let's talk
intro. That
about,
was phenomenal.
thank you.
I'm excited for it.
Sweet. I hope all of our listeners are excited to hear all of this. I'm excited about it. I've
Sure.
been preparing for this and just getting excited about talking to you about this stuff. So let's jump in. The school experience and community building is kind of our first topic here. So you've been leading the school events worldwide, which is awesome, comes with the bonus perk of travel, right? And you were a school games winner. So how
Yeah.
did you even get involved in that space and what drew you into community building?
Great question. I had walked away from like a pretty, so after college, I dropped out with like one class remaining, just start a bunch of businesses, and most of them failed. But a couple of them did really well, and one of them brought me over to China where I was doing a ton of like really cool work. I love working like interdisciplinarily and then also in between like cultures and different languages. Love that shit. And so that was a lot of fun, but it wasn't like the I was there for like I was studying environmental like triple bottom line business strategies. So responsible business, we'll say. And China wasn't interested. So I was sort of, after a while, I was like, kind of like, well, it's making good money, but I don't know if like, should I walk away? Should I not? And then fortunately, my partners did it for me. They took the company from me and left me with all the debts. And so I had to file bankruptcy. I lost everything from that point.
Oh my gosh.
And so I had to restart. And so I was kind of like reevaluated. So I went on this like soul searching adventure for the next few years afterwards, just traveling with like my last remaining credit card. I was just maxing that out, doing what I could, and then I'd have like little gigs here and there as I was traveling through. And I found myself doing courses, online courses, and I was trying every kind of platform you could think of. And school was the last one on my list because you couldn't customize it at all. Like, there's no, and clearly, it's like I'm a fan of the color stuff. So finally, when I did make my way over to it, 2-3 months later, I won the school games, and it was just like, I often talk about this, like a 5-year overnight success. All of the things that I had done in the previous 5 years, there were a couple of missing pieces. And so I had hired a couple of coaches at that time that just like, oh yeah, well, why don't you just put these two things together? And then it just dawned on me. I ran with it and won the school games. And from that point on, I was the only extrovert that was at the office. Like, they invited me to come in and hang out because I was creating a lot of buzz on the platform, particularly at this time. And so then the leadership just sort of said, hey, why don't you just like do this for us? We need more fun and peopleese up in
Yeah,
front of the actual events. And so that's what brought me in.
that's so cool. So,
Yeah.
as you know, I work with online business owners. I help them scaling with ads. But one of the biggest, I think, missed opportunities that I see is not having a strong community to back the funnel, right? Like the community and the memberships and the monthly recurring revenue model. How do
Yeah.
you create that space where people want to stay and actually engage?
Great question. Well, I can give you the technical first, and then I'll give you the fun part afterwards, because that's kind of where
Okay.
I thrive.
Yeah.
Strictly speaking, community requires three things. You need frequent interaction based around a common purpose. So there's two things right there. And then the last one's inside jokes. So it's like shit that you would share with your best friends that are like edgy jokes or something that's kind of fringe, or just a regular inside joke. Those are the things that help identify you as opposed to them, or them as opposed to you. So there's like people that are not in that community. And if
Mhm.
you have those three things, those are the deciding factors on what keeps people coming back to a place.
Yeah.
So for me, I sort of summarize it as culture. Alex defines it a little bit differently than I do. Yeah, Alex talks about it as something that, last time he was describing, it was like the list of rewards and punishments that you have for your community. And I sort of use culture in the sense of making it, when you feel pain or pleasure, the place you want to go
Mm-hmm.
to feel, to be able to share that usually.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, as tacky as it is, like, if you have a place where people can be authentic, like you're cool being that your raw self, that gives permission, the ability, it gives people the permission and the ability to be able to do that too. Because most of our lives, we don't get that. And so that is the
Mm-hmm.
overwhelming, like if I were to summarize all of community, if you can be yourself without being punished, then you've now arrived in a community that suits you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you remember Alex Sharfin. He's kind of off the radar now, but he's focusing on family and other investments. But I was in his community for a long time, and I think he's someone who did that really, really well, because I felt like that was my tribe. Those were my people. They got me. It
Yeah.
was that entrepreneurial personality type, the huntress, the people that know how to get after it, who we don't know how to turn it off, and we actually don't
Yeah.
understand
Yeah.
why people would want to. And so like he could speak to us in that way, and then we were all speaking to each other in that way, and we had that vulnerability and that connection. And I know like Alex Hormozy was a student of Alex Sharfin's as well, so it's exactly what you're saying. And I remember feeling that there, and
Yeah.
it was so, so good.
Yeah. You
So
even see it at the school games. Pardon, I'm still sick. You even see it at the school games events. I talk about this all the time. Most people think that they're there to see Alex and Sam, and that's exciting. But your biggest takeaway is the time that you spent with the other people in there. And I explain it as finally being in a room with people you don't have to explain yourself to.
yes, think about that at like Funnel Hacking Live, right? That's where you and
Yeah.
I met, was at Funnel
Yeah.
Hacking Live. And I wasn't necessarily there to be in the room and learn from Russell Brunson. One of the huge reasons that I go to events like that is to be in that room where you don't have to explain yourself.
Yeah, that's right.
And then when you get back home, that reentry back into like the normal world
Oh,
where,
dude.
like it's so hard.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's
so
really
hard.
tough. It's it's especially difficult because when you're the sort of mindset that is most likely to become an entrepreneur, you sort of have to overcome this massive hill of most of the world not really understanding or being interested in what it is you're trying to do. And you don't have something to point to yet most of the time. Like, what, but I know it's going to exist. And they're just, it's a Gnostic feeling. You can't really convey what you feel and what you see in those moments in a way that they'd be able to digest and be like, oh, I get it now. I see what's going on. Yeah, we all kind of have to do that battle almost on our own in order to earn the right to do it with others.
That's a mic drop moment right there. That's so interesting. Do it
Yeah.
on our own in order to earn the right to do it with others.
Yeah.
Wow.
I almost feel like it's better because, you can see a lot of the explanations that I see that, make sense, but on an esoteric level too, it almost makes more sense to me that it seems like a trade of sacrifice and intentional pain. And for some reason, the universe is like, love that. And then, okay, here you go. You can have a successful business
Yeah.
for a minute.
Yeah. So interesting. So
Yeah.
in all of that too, there are a million online businesses and digital marketers, right? So what's your strategy for helping people really stand out in their niche?
Oh, yeah. Great question. Well, most of them don't listen to me, frankly, but a lot of times
Well, what do you
it's
tell them?
close off. So usually the best strategy that I am aware of, actually it's kind of like the dating analogy. I was teaching that for a period of time just with friends and stuff. And it's interesting that we default to these tendencies that do not really benefit the goals that we're striving for. And so you really have to reflect and kind of unlearn a lot of them. And I'll give you a very clear example. If you've pulled up a dating app, the first impulse is like based off of the delicious feeling you have when like, oh, they like me. And you just like want to keep getting that hit. But it doesn't really help because actually your best people are going to be the ones, your closest matches, even just personality wise. Let's say you're just looking for friends, for example, are going to be the ones that appreciate the weirdest parts of you the most. And then that's what you guys bond on. So it's actually the opposite of your impulse. If you want to find people that you're the most likely to not be wasting time with, then you put the weirdest parts of yourself out there, and the ones that are like, oh, this person looks like this is totally my speed, right? Now you've already gone through and filtered out, whereas most of the rest of the time you made like a beautiful profile and everything's perfectly done up and you look excellent every shot. Well, now everyone's looking for you, and you now filter how? By spending in-person time. It's the same way with business, where your strength is in the degrees to which that you say no, and you focus in a certain capacity. And if that's not in a niche, then it's in you being raw you. And so those are kind of the two choices that you get. Niches are really hard for a lot of people. Sometimes being raw you is hard for a lot of people. But if you have those two options, because not everyone's a face person, but if you have more than one way to do it, and these are like the two that I usually give people the test for, or both if you're fortunate, the weirder you are, the more naturally you outstand in a group, which means there's going to be stronger feelings. And like I said, with communities, it's a place where you can have inside jokes. That's a consequence of a place that is innately unique.
Yeah. So that feeds into like authenticity and even vulnerability. So I don't know how
For
much
sure.
you know about like the Enneagram personality type.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm an 8, and so vulnerability is very hard for me. Authenticity, sure, I will show up as my authentic self, but like raw, vulnerable things like that, that's hard for me.
Yeah.
And a lot of my clients, they'll struggle more with like authentically showing up, like understanding their authentic voice in their marketing and things like that. So especially when they start running ads and scaling, they want to like change how they're talking to reach a bigger crowd instead of
Yeah, that's
staying
right.
authentic
Which is the
to their
mistake.
voice. Yes. So I want to ask you that. What is your advice then for balancing that visibility with authenticity in marketing, staying true to yourself versus like, do you go broad to try to attract more people?
I think going broad is a luxury, like a very high luxury. I really think that, like, after you've seen I've seen so many different variations of these, just being like so close to the whole school process, because you're like I'm right there on the pulse, and time again, in fact, I'd probably go as far as saying like 95% of the time, with very minor exceptions, most people are best served by being very narrow at the beginning. And if they don't do that, they kind of just start doing circles until they stumble into a more narrow space.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. What is your
Oh, can I share
go
one
ahead.
more thing about that?
Of course.
I want to explain the solution because it's really tough. Probably the best way to understand it would be, if you're not, here's the best way to understand it. For me, when you find yourself in a situation, which all of us do, where it's really challenging to niche down or to be your raw, authentic self, both those things are difficult depending on the point in your life that you're at. It really says something to be able to. It really says something to be able to say no to a whole group of people. Your natural first impulse is to be like, everyone can be my client. And your biggest worry is going to be that because you're niching down, you're saying no to a completely separate audience. And that's not the case. You actually are saying yes on the long run, no on the short term. Because when you're niching, it doesn't mean those clients will never be there. It just means that's how you enter a market. And as you've become more, you're more familiar, you're more recognized, you have history and credibility in that space, naturally it either grows in the direction of a different niche that fits you better that you didn't predict prior, or being wider and including more people that if you went for all of them at the beginning, you never would have arrived there. So that's why you do it.
So interesting. So, I mean, it's really a long-term game, and you can't come at it from a place of like desperation, the energy that you bring to it, because right, if you're so desperate that you'll take anybody or you'll serve everybody.
Yeah.
then
Yeah.
your
Hungry.
messaging, yeah, hungry.
Hungry, not desperate.
I like that better.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a big
I
one.
get that. I get that. That's a mindset shift. That's a perspective shift for sure. And headed into that like realm of positive psychology, which is fantastic. Something I'm
Yeah.
working on.
Yeah, to that end, I'm sorry I keep interrupting you, but you were inspiring all these extra nuggets that I've realized over the last couple of years. One of the big ones here is that also when you're getting started in particular, which is like these are one of the more difficult. It gets easier as you go. The challenges change, but when you don't have success, it's usually the hardest at the beginning. And
Mhm.
when you're trying to get started and you don't have that success yet, knowing that maybe this will be better served later in the conversation, but knowing that it's actually that you're able to, that everything that you sacrifice, all those pains, all those challenges at the very beginning will always come back and benefit you later on. This is how I'll summarize it. We'll revisit it later on, but
Yeah.
that's probably the best way that I would summarize it. Yeah.
I know we're going to revisit that because
Yeah.
I have questions about that.
Sure.
So
Yeah.
for sure. All right. I want to talk a little bit about like marketing, ads, scaling, community-based businesses, things like that. One of the biggest questions that I get from my audience is how do I scale beyond organic marketing? I'm focused on paid traffic. So what's your approach there with combining like ads, engagement, organic traffic, growth, things like that? How do you approach that?
So there's three levels that we have on school. There's ads, of course. There's organic, which would be on social media. In the case those listening don't know, ads you're paying for leads. Organic, you're posting, because a lot of people say organic, but they don't mean organic. I've noticed this a lot. That's when you're just posting content and naturally getting leads from that content. And then hyper organic would be you're getting leads from the platform that you're on naturally. For example, on school, you're on the discovery page, or people are talking about how good you're doing in some other capacity. So on school, I won the school games from my own personal network and hyper organic. So we never ran a single ad. And still for my communities, I've never run an ad. In fact, I've barely posted organic. So it was all almost entirely hyper organic.
That's so cool.
And so I've still been teaching a lot of organic and ads, but the strategy is basically the same. You're usually either expressing gratitude for something, like these are the cornerstones. If you're expressing gratitude, or you're talking about a win, or you're describing a challenge. If you're doing one of those three things, whether it be content or ad, with ad, I guess really it's content and ad combined. You're trying to expose that vulnerable part of you where others can empathize, sympathize, or relate. And
Mhm.
if they can do one or more of those things, well, then great. Now you've got someone who's a potential community member, at the very least, a client. And that's pretty much it.
Pretty much it. That's
Yeah.
awesome. No, I really like that. And I think it's fantastic and absolutely mind blowing to me that like you won without any paid traffic. I know that there are people that are using paid traffic as part of their strategy for like school games and things like that. So, and I always say like ads are just a feeder into a system. And if the system
Yeah.
is already working, we can amplify that with ads versus like if you're just trying something new, then we've got to talk about risk tolerance as well, because
Yeah.
there's a whole nother game to be played with like how much can I spend versus how much am I gonna win here. It's
That's
like
right.
gambling. We were just in Las Vegas. So
Yeah.
so all right, running ads for like a course, coaching, or community-based business, the cost per lead there is of course part of the equation. So when we talk about getting people in a community, how do you think about monetizing and retaining them once they're inside?
Sure. You mean like how do you capitalize, or how do you increase LTV?
Absolutely. Yep, absolutely. I just said it differently.
Sure.
So how can we think about increasing that lifetime customer value with those members once they're inside, or like decreasing
Yeah.
churn, things like that, because that's really in that type of model the long play is we need to keep people in there longer or upsell them into something else and make sure that that
Yeah.
lifetime value is there to sustain the monthly recurring revenue.
Yeah, it's a really great question. So there's a couple of ways. I usually work on an 80/20. So, I've seen so many things in aggregate that at this point I have a pretty good idea of like, here's the 20% that's really not gonna, here's the 80% that's not gonna make that much of a difference. Here's the 20% that will.
Right.
And so when it comes to LTV, there's a couple things to keep in mind. And this is assuming a monthly revenue model.
Yep.
So with that, you're kind of, I mean, they're sort of hand in hand. You're trying to reduce churn, which means you're focusing on retention, which would be the opposite. But oftentimes a good litmus test is your engagement. And so if you have a platform, the school does this quite well, where you can see, you can measure engagements done per person or per day or something like this, or per community is also a good one. You really only need like 5 to 10 or so super fans, people that are like engaged in the community, to really make it poppin'. Like that's pretty much it. And once you have that, which usually just takes a lot of like intimate one-on-ones or maybe like intimate group calls, when you start scaling to the point where you have now like 300 or 500 engagements in your space per day, now you've hit a flywheel. And that flywheel usually means that you can leave the room and it keeps running. Now, those two things don't necessarily directly relate to LTV, but it does influence it a lot. And so if you look at it from the other direction, this one's a little bit more ethereal, but the idea centers around value, because as long as you're providing value, they're going to stay. Now, that influences one more thing, which would be you have to decide how that value is being split. For example, if I'm paying you for whatever, some kind of coaching program, but I'm paying monthly, I'm going to be thinking about every month, did I get value for that thing? And if there's a month that I don't get it, there's probably a good chance that I'm going to churn during that month. However, if you've upsold those people to annual and you give them enough initial value in order to see merit in doing so, now they're looking at it on an annual level. So that gives you a lot more ease in what you're doing. So if it's just info products, sometimes it's nice to have something that's like an annual is often stickier than a monthly. That will take a lot more time. But monthlies oftentimes can be more fun. There's a lot more interaction. There's more motivation for everyone to be interacting in a more consistent way. So if that's more your goal, then you just need some stickier features like a software or a competition or something like that that would happen frequently enough that would influence the monthly rate.
Interesting. You've got my wheels turning.
Yeah. I know that
So
I ran through a bunch there.
Yeah. Well, definitely. I mean, at the end, I'm going to let people know how they can get in touch with you and follow you and all of that stuff, because there's so much to learn from you that we can't cover in a podcast episode. Like, you are just a wealth of information. So having said that, I want to talk a little more about personal stuff. So
Hit me.
you've had some major wins, but I also know that you've had some setbacks. So can you share a moment when you've had to pivot or get back up after a hit?
Oh, sure. A small one or a big one?
You pick.
Yeah.
A mindset shift, a challenge, a pivot, something that you want to share.
I think I'll start with one of the big ones. That was like when I lost, I think it was like 360 grand in China and then had to file bankruptcy. That one was a big one. And I kind of had two options because my dad's side of the family is all lawyers and doctors. And so immediately, they're like, okay, you better sue these bitches into the ground. And they're like, let's chase these guys for as many years as it takes. And
I thought you were going to say that they were telling you should go to like medical school, and you'd be like, Dr. Goose. So,
well, they stopped trying to push that one when they realized it just wasn't going to happen. But I think they still have a little bit of hope. The Dunlavey side of the family has always been very education centered. And if you're not following those footsteps, then kind of fuck you. But when it came to that period where I kind of had two options there. I was like to have another solution or to like chase what I had lost. And it was sort of I was fortunate in retrospect in a way, because if that shakeup hadn't happened, I might have been continuing to be in this place where I was like, well, it's not exactly what I want to do. It's not really that fulfilling, but it makes money, so it's probably okay. And I know I wouldn't have been happy if I stayed.
Wow. Yeah.
So that's when I like sold the last few things that I had and got a camera and went with a couple of friends to Peru, and that's where it started. And I lived in Peru for like 9 months and then like just kept on bouncing around. That was what I learned from that whole period was that if you're not fully invested in what you're doing, it's probably a greater gamble to stay there than it is to gamble on something that you do like doing and you're actually invested in more. And again, it's kind of a Gnostic thing. So, most people will probably realize this in retrospect. Oh, it was great that I lost so that I could start over somewhere new. But that was one of the big ones.
Yeah.
Another more minor one that had happened more recently was after the school games when we were servicing a lot of people. Like it was done for you funnels, and we were serving a lot of people that were relative beginners. And so they were like, hey, I'm going to get this funnel and shit's going to work, right? No, not really. It's kind of like ads. It amplifies the system you have. So if you don't have the fundamentals down, then, you're not going to get there. And
Right.
so trying to like get to the part of doing funnels, but like having this audience that wasn't really a qualified client meant that there was so much labor involved with training them to be able to do it. It was too many things all at once. It wasn't a niche. You're now expanding way too quickly. So I decided to axe at the time it was a grand a month, axe that. And then ever since then, it's just been $100 a month. And it totally changed. It was just like, okay, we're going to teach you how to scale to the point that you need or can use a funnel.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And that was a big one.
That's an awesome pivot. To your
Yeah.
first one, I can wholeheartedly relate to that. I didn't, I had a previous business partnership where we had, 7-figure business, and it was a misalignment in partnership. It was not a great fit for us together. We lasted 5 years, but like the exit was very tumultuous. The exit was
Mhm.
very traumatic. And
Yeah.
like I literally left the company while holding my like 4-week-old baby. It
Mhm.
was so hard. I basically had like my maternity leave taken from me because of all the things that went down. So there was no maternity leave. I jumped and it was a huge leap of faith. But like again, in retrospect, right? Looking back at that,
Yeah.
it was exactly what I needed to do in order
Yeah.
to get to the place where I'm at right now, which I am so much happier and
Yeah.
essentially doing a lot of the same stuff I was doing there. But like, I'm not attached to someone who berates me in front of clients and things like that. So it's this huge like energy change. I'm showing up so differently and so much more powerfully because of leaving that situation. And it
Yeah.
really has pivoted and changed so much in my entire life. Like it
Yeah.
affected not just my business, not just my revenue, but how I show up as a human. It's incredible how setbacks like that like continue to mold us and shape
Yeah.
us and change us and let us
Yeah.
show up as the best version of ourselves. So,
The
man,
crazy thing about what you're saying is that I think it's actually quite universal. Again, I guess maybe I'm using that word today, but when you, as an entrepreneur, every setback that you have will either improve the long run of what you're doing or be the reason why you quit.
mm,
And it's kind of up to you.
true.
So that's the crazy part about it is that it literally is your ability to say, I'm going to keep going every time. And though you keep stacking those things, and that's what contributes in so many different ways to the new version and everything that you think, the story of the monk who says, someone broke their arm. Everyone thinks it's bad news. They're like, well, maybe. And then it saves him from being signed up to go to the war. And they're like, wow, it's great news. And he's like, monk's like, well, maybe. And you keep evaluating that it's only good or bad news, depending on how far you've zoomed in or out. It's just
Mm,
news, and it's part of the journey that you have to do in order to be prepared when you're finally having in the position with enough knowledge and practice to have success.
100%. I came across a post yesterday on Instagram. I shared it to my stories about like grit and that, entrepreneurship takes grit and tenacity. It can be brutal, but it walked through like the psychology behind it and like the different parts of your brain that are activated when you're gritty through this situation or gritty through that. And then, how it just elevates you to this next level of thinking and ability because of how you've worked through these scenarios.
Yeah.
All right. I need to shift a little bit from this because I also
Sure.
think that fun and creativity are so crucial for longevity as an entrepreneur, right? So how do you keep business exciting and sustainable?
For myself or clients?
For you,
For me,
what's your
man.
secret? How do you love having fun? You show up as this very authentic, like it's your own personality just shining through, and like the id gaff, what other people think. So
I've never heard it phrased like that. Yeah. The IDGAF.
uh-huh.
Yeah, I think it probably has something to do with, like, I'm pretty stubborn, and the funny part is, I'll put it this way. I think we talked about this in Vegas. When I was at the FHL event, this was like a really good example of it. The number of people that came up and were like, this is fucking brilliant. Your marketing strategy is so good. And they were all referencing my like giant leopard yellow coat with like the really cool blue lapels and all the other shit I was wearing. I think I had a Magikarp outfit on most of those days. I left one of my bags behind, so I just had my Magikarps, which is fine. Best Pokemon. But it still shocks me a little bit because that's just always been me. And in fact, most of my life, it did me no favors. The vast majority of my life, it did me no favors. Very few people were like, hey, I like this whole you being you thing. And it usually was, I was wearing colors and stuff either to get attention or to make a point or to, like, there was just some, like, it wasn't just I liked it. And for me, literally, and I'll explain it right now, for me, the reason why I love color so much is because it's kind of like music for the eyes, where it's a much less intense degree as music, which can like really influence something. But unlike music, it's kind of around all the time. So you're at a lower rate, but more consistently influencing the space that you're in. So if you have a particular emotion that you'd like to be in, just like with music, you wear that emotion, and it doesn't just pervade you, but it also pervades the space that you're around. It's a lot harder to be upset in a place where you have a giant yellow T-shirt with a big happy face or something on it. You know what I mean? Or like, any of these things. They're interesting to me because I feel better, like in a vacuum with no other people around. I would just feel better on my own.
I'm telling you, I showed up with these red tassel earrings and I'm like just having the time of my life.
Yeah,
because
that's
they're
right.
on. I need to wear these more often. Like,
yeah, and you look amazing. You look put together. Like, I look like I rolled out of a pile of clothes and the really colorful one just stuck to me for some reason. Like, there's no cohesion. Like, even still to this day, people are constantly telling me like, hey, like, put myself together, like make the patterns match and stuff like that. And sure, I mean, maybe I should, but to me, I'm still a little bit lazy. And I just like having colors. That's it. Those are my only two. Those are my two motivators. And so when I imagine like reverse engineering that, which probably you're in the same boat with what you're with everything that you've got going on with the giant leopard outfit and that cool necklace and the red earrings, like when you reverse engineer it, really, I came at it from a different direction, but the goal was pretty much the same. I just didn't want to be an extension of my environment. That was what I wanted to do personally, was not be an extension of my environment. And if you have that mentality with your business, then it kind of does the work for you. Because you can say the same things as I did with all of my business. I said the same things. There's nothing that crazy, or there's nothing new that I was really doing, and no one really will be doing anything particularly new. Maybe the industry is slightly different. There's always going to be some modification, but by and large, it's all the same shit.
Yeah.
And so it just repackaged differently.
Yeah.
So if all that's different is the paint on the outside, then why would you make it black or white if your industry is largely black or white? Why
Or
would you make it
gold.
colorful if your industry is largely colorful? Your
Uh-huh.
point is to stand out from your environment. Otherwise, and this was my motivation, there's a good chance that you are a product of your environment, not a participant.
Wow. Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. That's amazing. A product of your environment versus a participant.
Yeah.
Okay. I want to move into the next session or section of
Yeah.
this. We're about to wrap up, but what I want to finish up with here before we close is a little bit of rapid fire questions.
Great.
I have 4 of them. And so this is the only part of our talk today that I didn't give you any heads up on. So let's dive in. Are you ready?
Sure. Yeah. Rapid fire. I'm game. This sounds fun.
All right.
I like
Let's
this stuff.
go with some rapid fire questions. Question number 1. What's one underrated marketing strategy that you swear by? And I feel like I'm going to know your answer based on what we just talked about.
I mean, the larger answer would be standing out, but the smaller answer would be color. People are scared of color. Like mature, grown adults are scared of color. And it's a fear. It's a fear, which is weird because, and let me just harp on this for a second. It is weird to see these full grown adults terrified of color because of how they think it might allow them to be perceived. Somehow we got tricked into thinking that color meant amateur and black and white meant professional, but there's no real reason there. It's the same thing like chocolate and vanilla are considered opposites, but are they actually? Do they grow on the opposite side of the same tree? I don't know.
Okay. Question number 2. Biggest mistake that business owners make with community engagement.
Dude, that would be thinking they have to figure it out before they do it.
Yeah.
Just take action.
Okay.
You just do it.
Do it. Yeah, I love that. Are you an
Yeah.
Enneagram 8 too? Because that's like one of those jump out of the airplane and figure out the parachute on the way down sort of thing.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember. I think it was I swear it was like a 2-wing 8 or 7 or something like that.
I could see being a 2 or a 7 for sure.
Yeah, it was something like that. Sorry, I don't remember. I'll have to message my friends and ask. They did a bunch of those tests and I was like, oh,
Yeah.
that's cool. But
Yeah.
I can't hold on to the information. I don't know why.
Totally fine. Okay, next one. What's your personal favorite community that you've ever been a part of?
Oh, that's a great question. There's this soil community that I'm a part of right now. They're a client of ours. Fuck. It's about soil. And they have a star, meaning they are one of the top 1% engaged communities because first of all, they fucking listened to everything that we were talking about and they implemented it. And it just showed me like how you don't have to have some crazy pie in the sky, like incredible thing. It could be about dirt.
Dirt.
And you can have a community around it that is successful.
That's awesome.
Yeah, totally stands out in my mind.
Oh my gosh. So cool. Okay, last one. What is one thing that you would tell yourself 10 years ago?
Oh man, your reality is based off of the people that you surround yourself with. So change that and you'll change the other quickly.
Yeah. So you've changed who you've surrounded yourself with and it's changed your reality.
When I started taking it seriously,
Mhm.
I've always been a creative that like had to learn how to do the business thing. I imagine probably the same for you. And it meant that there was a lot of different ways that I approached things that you wouldn't necessarily teach in like a traditional way, right?
Yeah.
And so when it came to trying to, how would I explain it? Do you know what I'm talking about here as far as like being a creative and stepping into the space? Let me ask you this first. Relating to what we're talking about, what was one big thing that you had to discover or overcome when it came from being a creative, if I'm right, that you are learning the business, going the business route?
So something I had to overcome as a creative in order to like focus on the business. Is that what you're saying?
No, you probably weren't naturally a salesperson, but you learned how to be coming from the creative side.
Yeah. Yeah. And I've gone through different like iterations of like how to sell too. I've gone through like the sales trainings where it's like, get the credit card on the call. And then I'm like, that doesn't feel authentic to me. Like, so
Yeah.
different ways of approaching the way that people tell you to sell